everybody, this is Keith Gleason, host of Indie Comics Relay, creator of the Mighty Mascots, and promoter for the Plastic City Comic Con. And this is a very special episode for you guys. My friend David Lucarelli and my co-host Johnny C. were in a panel at San Diego Comic Con for a panel for writing for indie comics. And there's a whole host of great creators on this panel, including Christina Z from Witchblade, my pal David Lucarelli from Tinseltown, which is another alternate book. A guest that's been on the show before, Madeline Holly Rosing from the Boston Metaphysical Society. Edward Davis from Finish Line Comics, who was on our show last night, literally. Johnny C., of course, my good friend and co-host. And then Connie Huang from Hyde Hermit Studio. So this is a panel they recorded at this past San Diego Comic-Con. Special thanks to David Lucarelli for giving us this panel to show on Indie Comics Relay. And without further ado, here's the panel. Hope you enjoy.
I'm your host for this panel. My name is David Lucarelli, and I thought we'd just go down the line and have everybody introduce themselves. I'm going to ask everybody a question or two, and then we'll open it up to questions from you guys. Everybody that asks a question gets a bag of some free comics and, in some cases, some free toys. So, without any further ado, this is Connie.
Hi, my name is Connie. I'm actually the founder of Hyde Hermit Studio. Being in this panel, thank you for hosting it, David. I'm a self-published children's book, but I also write a little bit of comics, but I'm also an artist too. And basically focusing on our mascot, Hyde the Hermit Crab. And he basically teaches kids and adults to be confident with their artwork.
Hi, my name is Madeline Holly Rosing. I am the writer and creator of a steampunk supernatural series, Boston Metaphysical Society, and I'm also currently writing a series for Lady Mechanica.
Hi, I'm Edward Davis. I created Finish Line Comics, and I write two ongoing series right now. One is Immortal Era. It's a post-apocalyptic story set in a world where everyone has become immortal and the quest to bring death back into the world. And a second series, Corruptor, about a mafia hitman who has to corrupt souls and trying to win a battle of souls before everyone becomes immortal in the world.
Yeah!
I'm Christina Z. I co-created a comic book called Witchblade in the 90s for Top Cow Comics. And a host of other comics for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and IDW and a couple others, but I have a lot of knowledge from being one of the first females to break the charts in comic books when there was no sort of infrastructure or support for women. So I have a lot of information about that and working with artists, and especially in an independent realm, where you're working really close with an artist and an inker and the colorist.
Hey y'all, I'm Johnny C. I'm an independent comic creator, self-published. I'm also the co-host of a YouTube series, Indie Comics Relay, where we feature indie comic creators. I have a few titles up there. On the far right, you see The Pond, old school black and white horror. Basically, pitches terror emerges from a pond in a sleepy town. It's up to the sheriff's department to stop it. The middle is actually a San Diego Comic-Con cover for a book, Surrounded by Death. Surrounded by Death is a little Mallrats meets The Walking Dead. That's kind of the flavor of the book. We have that at our table. We did an exclusive print that looks very much like what coming into the show looks like every morning. And then on the far right, I have my spaghetti western, Startana. It's based on a pre-existing character from the old series of Italian spaghetti western movies. Same way Quentin took Django, I took Sartana. And I'm very grateful for you guys to be here and share your time with us. Thank you so much.
And I'm David Lucarelli. I currently write a comic book called Tinseltown for Alterna Comics, which is a period crime drama about one of the first female cops in Hollywood. I realized my mother was a police officer, so also my tribute to her. And I also wrote the Children's Vampire Hunting Brigade trilogy, which came out through Creators Edge Press and my own imprint, Abacab Studios. It's a coming-of-age gothic adventure, kind of like a punk rock Buffy set in Scotland that was inspired by the real-life Gorbals vampire incident. So, now that you know who we are, Connie, you are the only person up here that, in addition to being a writer, is also an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And you've done art for other people's comics as well as your own.
Yes.
So how do you approach each of those cases differently?
Well, when it comes to self-publishing, you have your own set of rules of what stories you want to go through. But at the same time, when you're making your own stories, you have to do a lot of your market research and where your target demographic is. And it's a little different in a way, like I have more control doing self-publishing. On the other hand, if you're going to work with a client, I have to basically follow what their script is, and that fits with their tone of the work too as well. And I have to, listen to their feedback of like, hey, we gotta change like XYZ to ABC. But sometimes you go argue with your clients, like, no, it won't work in the story. The fact that that's like, yeah, the story doesn't make any sense. And going back and forth, it just takes a lot more time.
Okay, so you did market research and you found out children like hermit crabs.
I mean, for me, it's like I chose the hermit crab because of the fact that there's a lot of like common animals like turtles, dragons, cats, and dogs, and hermit crabs is something very unique on its own perspective, especially if you like to hide in your shell and also be changing into like different costumes or shells because of the fact that you can adapt to like other situations.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So, Edward, you, in addition to being a comic book writer, you're also a teacher.
Yes.
So you have a kind of a perfect captive test audience for your books in your classes. If you ever teach them how to write comics or show them your work or get feedback from them?
My work's definitely not kid-friendly, so I don't do much showing the kids my work. But I do small comic writing things with them. We've done things where I show them how to write a comic script. I kind of tell them there's multiple ways, how to do layouts. So we do a little comic creating after-school program in my school. We have in the past, and that's something I share with them. And I share the artwork that I can. I show them kind of how the artist's process is, how he goes from the initial layouts to pencils to the final coloring with the pages that would be appropriate. So I love to share those things with the students, and we also do a career day at our school, and I've done a career day presentation kind of talking of how you want to create a comic book, here's the steps you need to do. So I've shared it, but not sharing so much of my work because I think I would give the 3rd and 4th graders nightmares.
You also do something I noticed, even though you're self-published, you work with an editor, is that correct?
I do, actually. One of my editors is right in the room right now, and I work with 2 editors actually. One does a lot of story editing with me, and then one works on kind of finalizing the dialogue and making sure that the book is 100% perfectly grammatically sound, because the one stigma that you get with indie comics is that it's going to be sloppy grammar, poor punctuation, and as a teacher that would make me completely lose my mind. So I work with 2 different editors to make sure that if they're going to complain about the story, they have every right, but they won't find any kind of nitpicks with the grammar and punctuation.
Very good. Johnny, now, in addition to being a comic writer, you are also a vibrant part of the whole comic book community. As you stated before, you host a show called Indie Comics Relay, and you're part of a comic book collective called Dial Bar Studios. So I was wondering if you could talk about both of those things and how that's helped you as a comic creator.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So first, I kind of want to ask the audience, who is currently making comics out here? Anybody? Okay, so we got a few hands. Who wants to make comics out here? A few hands. Okay, so one of the things is like, it's no sugarcoating it. Comics is a struggle. It's a struggle. Any creative endeavor is a struggle. There's gratification in doing it, but I found in the process of wanting to have my creative endeavors is to kind of surround yourself with good people in the community and good associates in indie comics at our level are individuals that boost each other. So one of the main things when we started Indie Comics Relay was during COVID. And I had the normal, the convention schedule. I'd go and I'd network and I'd see people. And all of a sudden that's pulled up from under us. What do you do at that point? So my colleague, Keith Gleason, it's actually Keith's show. I'm just the editing man. But Keith wanted to find where we could still boost comics and still boost creators, even though we were kind of stuck at home and kind of, not able to do our usual comic creator thing. Part B of that, Dial R Studios. A lot of people want to be able to exhibit at San Diego Comic-Con. It's not easy. It's not cheap. It's hard. There's a waiting list that you have to wait forever to get on. So in comes Dial R Studios. Does anybody know Pat Loca here in the audience? Pat? So Pat's a wonderful advocate for indie comics. Pat had a collective, Dial R. Basically, they're just a bunch of creators who came together to be able to afford booth space. They formed this collective and they were exhibiting on the floor. I kind of followed along peripherally, and I knew I was making comics, and I was coming to San Diego Comic-Con consecutively since 2009. And in that journey, I found myself as a creator. I wanted to get more involved, and that's kind of how I got into Pat's orbit and became friends. And then one day, I kind of so brazenly and boldly asked Pat, I go, hey man, if there's ever a slot in the Dial R, I'd love to step in. And just coincidentally, out of some cosmic nature, somebody had left the booth. And that was my opportunity. Pat slotted me in. I've been there ever since. We're always in 2103. We're right underneath the red independent press banner, which is the best placement you can get. Come back to see us under the red banner. So really, long story short, I'm very long-winded here, and I apologize, but really just advocacy, boosting indie creators and other individuals who are looking to get into the business, be supportive. It's real hard, so we just want to offer support and help and kind of boost each other. Rising tide raises all boats, as they say.
Right, and you had this guest on your show.
That's right, yeah. David came on the show a couple of times, I think.
I think so.
Yes, absolutely. So if you are an indie creator and you do want to come on the show and advocate for your work, we'll advocate for you. You just got to give us a couple of months in advance. Let us know, because we're blocked out.
Now, Madeline, you alluded to the fact you got Boston Metaphysical Society, which is your baby, and you not only have the comic, but you've also put it in other exciting formats like audio drama. But what is your approach as a writer doing your own project versus working on Lady Mechanica?
Well, for one, when it's my own project, it's essentially springing from my own head. It's the world that I've developed, as opposed when working with Joe and Marcia. That's Joe's world, and that's Joe's baby. So the nuts and bolts of it is when Marcia approached me to do a story, I said hey, send me just PDFs of all your stuff. I read it all through, and I said, okay, I'll send you 3 pitches. How does that sound? So that sounds great. So yeah, I did the deep dive into Lady Mechanica, and surprisingly enough, I hadn't read any Lady Mechanica, even though I am doing a steampunky type as well. And there was a reason for that. When I was first developing my story, I didn't want to accidentally pull in other elements from somebody else's world. So that at this juncture in time, there's no fear of it that's ever going to happen. So yeah, learning the characters, learning his world, learning how they act and react to each other, and then coming up with 3 pitches that I thought would work within their world that he hadn't done before, because I didn't want to just repeat something he had already done. Delivered those to them. They liked all of them, but one in particular. And so at that point, I did an outline and I've been working with Marcia, back and forth on the basic outline, which took a number of months. A lot of back and forth. in regards to structure and character. And then when that was finalized, I went to script, and then it goes to Joe, and basically, Joe does whatever Joe wants to do. And so, for him, it's just a basic structure. It's almost, unlike my own comic and other shorts that I've done for other people's world, which I actually handle everything out, they wanted it in a script format, like a film script format. And that's something I come from film and TV, so that was like a no-brainer for me. Actually, it's a lot easier to write. And to give him the bones of the story and the basic arc of the story. And then Joe, being him and his own creative genius, goes in and, can change things, which obviously he can do. And then he's still working on the art, so I'm waiting for him to finish the art, and then I go back and I'm going to do another pass for dialogue based on the changes that he made from my script. So a lot of it has to do with, it's a more collaborative effort as opposed to when it's just me. I do have beta readers for my own work, and I take their advice very seriously. But otherwise it's usually just me rewriting some more when it's my own.
And when you use your beta readers, are they looking at the final art, or are they just looking at your script?
They're just looking at the script.
Okay.
And as art, when the final script is done and it goes to the artist, as the pages come in, I'll make note of any changes that need to be made, and then the artist will make the changes, but then I will rewrite dialogue based on the way the paneling is done, if I see something that needs to be better. So I do a lot of passes before it ever even gets to my letterer. So by the time it gets to my letterer, it's, maybe there's a comma missing somewhere that I'll pick up later, but it's essentially done. It makes my letterer very happy.
Christina, now when I think of super successful indie comics, I guess the upper echelon is Walking Dead, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but Witchblade is right up there, and you have live action adaptations and anime and toys and other merchandise. From an outsider's perspective, that looks like the indie comics creator's dream coming true. Is that true, or what's the inside dope on what it's really about?
Well, it's funny because when you asked me to join the panel, I remember the first thing I said to him. I said, I didn't really consider it indie comics because working for the studio I did, which was Top Cow at the time, Witchblade shot right to the top. We just had a magical team, and it overtook almost anything that was going on with Marvel and DC. But he made a really great point. He said, no, the studio I worked with was the outcasts from Marvel and DC who didn't want to be told what to do or how to do it. And of course, having worked with Joe Benitez as well, a lot of our artists at the studio, they wanted to have the freedom that all of you guys want and to not really be told from a major studio how to do what you want to do. And I think that really is, you can have all the success that, you have with a major studio, but in indie comics, when you have that passion of your own and you have your vision, in your head, you don't want someone just immediately putting their foot down and saying, no, you can't do it that way. So having all that success really was amazing. I mean, again, there's toys and there was anime and live action, but the most important part is we wouldn't be told what we could and couldn't write. In fact, one of the first things that made me want to get into comics was I was reading, I can't remember what it was, but the main character was a woman, or maybe she was a side character. And she said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy the fanciest dress and I'm going to wear the most expensive makeup. And the artist had drawn like a coverable compact and like her at like a mall with like a dress barn. And I was like, no, that's not at all. something that would be considered fancy. Let's just completely do away with that. And I wanted to show something that was authentic with my vision. So with independent studios, it just is a vibrancy that so many other major studios can't allow you to do. And I found that to be, again, with all of the success and I guess all of the chart toppings and being on the top 10, none of that actually mattered. It was just more being authentic to yourself and working really closely at the big studios that I've worked with. You don't necessarily ever get to talk to the penciler, or you wouldn't be able to get on the phone immediately with the inker or the colorist and say, oh, I think this is it. But it's a chance for you to have your ultimate vision come to life, and I was able to do that, and I think that's why we're all here in the room, is because you see the difference in that, is that, your vision matters.
Sure. And before you wrote comics, you have a background as a music journalist, and you've been able to incorporate some of your love and passion for music in some of your comics and other multimedia work. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I actually was found by Top Cow Studios through my work in music journalism. I used to write a column in underground rave music and the clubs that were in Los Angeles and even down in San Diego, where you had to have passwords to get in, and it was really secretive. But I decided that we should incorporate more music, and we did. And it sort of evolved to a point where DreamWorks Records said, we want to make a CD, we want to make an actual soundtrack. And so at that time, it was the very first ever comic book soundtrack where you could go through, certain episodes or certain issues, and you could match the song to the issue. And I got to work with a lot of amazing artists that, just huge, influences in music, and even now, just huge bands. And I thought that was really important. Even back then, it was just at the beginning of the internet, and so multimedia wasn't even a thing. It was so, and that's another thing, is if you guys have those ideas and nobody's doing them, and you think, let's do something that somebody hasn't done, and everyone thinks you're crazy, well, just keep pushing it, because again, you're not going to be told no, like at major studios. You can actually, find a way to get it done, because nobody's going to tell you that. So, yes, multimedia, we did stuff with, I think, like USB drives, there was a lot of things that were planned, but yes, music and multimedia and comic books, I think, will always go hand in hand. I certainly can't separate them. And I would say too, if you're writing and you're creating, see what music strikes you, and see, make your own sort of playlist when you are writing to just impassion you. And I found that to be like a really helpful tool as well.
For sure. Yeah, speaking as a songwriter myself, I think the mediums, are both very much about the economy of words for maximum impact. I always mention in this panel, Alan Moore gave the advice to Gaiman that 210 is the maximum amount of words you ever want per page, and you want that broken down into by panel. So basically 35 words per panel maximum, if you have 6 panels on a page. And then you did another project that I was interested in that is kind of comic adjacent, called 13 Ghost Stories. Maybe you can mention that.
Yeah, oh my gosh. So I got to work with Ashley Wood, who is a toy maker and, just a painter, an amazing, almost avant-garde artist. And that was for IDW, and it was sort of an anthology of just creepy stories. And I came up with, oh my gosh, it was all very, it was adult-oriented. It was probably the most adult-oriented, and Ashley Wood wanted it that way. And I was absolutely on board. Again, being one of the first females, I was probably the first female to do sort of very R-rated work at that time on the charts. And it was, half the book was Amber Benson, and half the book was myself, and it was a series, it was a mini-series, and it was a very creepy love story about a vampire and a woman who decides to go against, all her friends' recommendations to stay away from the bad vampire and then just go with it. And I did that at the time because a lot of people in mainstream comics versus indie were telling me at that time to, only do things that would be very PG, do things that would be completely commercial, because that's where the market is, that's where the money is, that's where everybody should go, and it's very PC. And I just thought, you know what, we don't have to do that, because if it is an indie label, you know what, as a woman, I'm gonna say, forget all of that, I'm gonna just go with the unpopular opinion and do this. And of course it was wildly successful and it was very well received. But I also think that, again, for a woman saying, look, this might not be the right person for me, but I'm gonna, I'm gonna fall in love with this terrible vampire. So, that was called 13 Ghosts.
Very cool. So before we go to questions, I realize I would be remiss if I didn't ask Madeline another question about, crowdfunding is pretty much essential to the indie comics world at this point, be it Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And Madeline, you have written one of the books about how to properly do a comic book Kickstarter that I have read, and you actually taught a class on it that I attended. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what your advice would be to somebody out here that might be thinking about doing their first Kickstarter.
Well, first off, I've run 13 successful Kickstarters, and the book is called Kickstarter for the Independent Creator. There is a caveat. It was updated in 2020. Kickstarter has evolved quite a bit since then. So if you do pick up the book, the strategies are still very sound, exactly the same, but many things on Kickstarter have changed since 2020. As far as advice, there are two ways. You can self-fund, you can crowdfund. There are plus and minuses to both. Self-funding, you eliminate the stress of crowdfunding that is required, but you also don't get the audience that you do through Kickstarter. And I have built a fairly substantial fan base through Kickstarter that's kind of, echoed out into the world, which is a great way to go. I would first either pick up my book, look at Tyler James' Comics Launch. He does a great job. You need to have an email list, but even if you don't have an email list of potential backers, Kickstarter, the last couple of years, started what they have a launch page. So if you get your page ready, it's approved, then you have your little launch page with your pretty picture on it, and you can share that around and start building on that, and people click on that and they'll be notified when you launch. That's a great way to start building. But if you have like a zero mailing list, you need to start that 3 months ahead of time. The main thing with crowdfunding is in the preparation. Everything depends on the preparation. So you need to have have to schedule your podcast months ahead of time. You need to get your press releases written. You need to get that email list. You need to get as far as possible to finished on your project, so your backers aren't waiting forever for the book to show up. You have to update on a regular basis. But the main thing, you need to mentally and physically prepare, because this is a second full-time job. And a short story of a man, he bought my book once on a Friday night at WonderCon. He came back Saturday, he goes, I read your book last night. I said, okay, great. He goes, I'm never going to run a Kickstarter. And I said, that's the best $10 you've ever spent. Because now you know what is required to run a crowdfunding campaign. And it's okay not to run a crowdfunding campaign if you don't want to do that, and you can self-fund or do it another way. But if you choose to do that, you do have to know that you have to take care of yourself. You have to make sure you're taking care of your backers, your family. I know my husband and I, we like pre-made meals and throw them in the freezer because I ain't cooking for a month. Not gonna happen.
I mean, it's literally possible if you're running a Kickstarter to just be on your computer from the moment you wake up to the moment you pass out every day for the life of the campaign.
Yeah, I don't recommend that.
You have a nature to actually check your campaign every 5 minutes.
Yeah,
The refresh.
Yeah, the refresh button is like, you get obsessive about it, it's crazy.
I will tell you, when I launch a campaign, pretty much it's ingrained, so I've done this so much that I know when things have to be done and things, but the first 3 days, I am at the computer.
Sure.
The first 3 days, because those are really important, and to make sure everything's going in the right direction, you're answering anybody's questions, concerns, putting out any fires before it becomes a wildfire, and starting those initial podcasts and interviews that you're doing. And I have a habit of, when I post, I'll post like on a few groups on Facebook, and then I go away, and I go to some other platform, and then I go away. So I have never ended up in Facebook jail. I've never ended up in Facebook jail from overposting, and that's because I'm going to do this, I'm going to go away for an hour, and then I'll go do something else. But I have it up, so if people start talking on the post, I answer, so it increases the algorithm. And we all know the drill. We all launch. It's like, hey, I launched, and I don't like it. I'm like, go, go, go. And then you like that, and then it'll go like, yeah, that's great. And that's all you have to do. And then people are doing this to increase the algorithm. Anyway, it's crazy town. But the payoff is great, not only monetarily, but to build your fan base.
Absolutely. And with that, I guess here's contact information for all the analysts up here. And does anybody in the audience have any questions? Yes?
Hi. So, I'm a starter for comics, and I wanted to know if you should try, like, you have this really big, great idea that's, like, marinating in the back of your mind. Should you, like, book it and start, like, writing it and, like, drawing it, or just kind of wait for it and do, like, smaller portions of comics to, like, lead up to your big idea?
Who's that question for? Anybody specific? All of us?
Yeah, everybody at the table.
I can.
Sure. Want to take it down?
Yeah, sure. So, like, if I were to give you input on that, so I have been writing comics since 2012, and actually publishing them since 2014. I still have not written my magnum opus that I actually set up to make comics on yet. It's still in the back of my mind. I've started to, and it kind of fails in the process, and I'm glad it did, because I wasn't ready to write that story then. So I guess it really comes down to where are you at in your comic making process. If I could give advice from my own experience, I would say go out there, work on other projects, work on other people's work, then come back to that project. You now have perspective and experience that you didn't have before that will inform the story. And I think that might actually take it further. So in the instance of the story that I still have in my head, I'm glad I deferred. Because now I feel like when I do come to that point, and I don't know about all the other creators in here, but some of it's like feeling. You have to have like a gut feeling to be ready to go with it and be like jazzed about it. There have been times where I've had a great idea, started writing it, and then I put it in a drawer and I come back to it, and I just don't, that spark is gone. It makes me feel like maybe that wasn't the right story to do, or just not at that time. So I'm an advocate of biding your time, and writing is pre-writing is pre-writing. there's more writing done up in here than actually at a keyboard, in my perspective, in my science, when it comes to creating a comic book.
So I also think that having a journal or a very specific folder on your computer for that project, visible, where you can see it and you can always add to it, is so important. If it's on your phone or like a running sort of notepad, where whenever you have that idea, because you could be anywhere, just jot down those notes, and then maybe you won't even revisit that for a couple months, and then eventually just keep adding, and then refreshing it, and then revisiting. Some things you'll say, oh, I can't believe I thought about that, or oh, I don't want to add that anymore. And then just always keep a running log. But, if there's, I always have like a pretty journal or something that I'll always have by the bed, or something that you can keep on your phone always near you, but just keep it with you.
I would say the same thing. My story that I'm working on right now, Immortal Era, my original notes go all the way back to 1998. I didn't start adapting this story until 2018, but I constantly got ideas for the story, and I keep a notebook everywhere I might get an idea. So I have one next to my bedside, I keep one in my classroom, I have one in the car. So wherever an idea will strike, I'm ready to write it down. And I may not revisit it for years, so I have pieces of Immortal Era that won't show up until maybe 2026. But these notes are there, so when I need them, I can jump right back into them. So even if you're not going to tackle that opus, have all the notes ready, and anytime an idea strikes, have that thing to write it down wherever it may be. And since I'm more old school, everything is notepads for me, but it stacks this thick. But all of those things can materialize later on.
It'll happen at the most inopportune times, when you're driving, when you're in the shower, when you're mowing the lawn. It's like, you just have to retain it and get it down as soon as possible.
When I'm running, that's when I get home and drip over the notepad. Like, all right, I'm dripping sweat, but this idea has to get out before I go shower, because otherwise it's going to be lost to the world. And yeah, you just, have your drippy, sweaty notebook as well. So keep them all out there and never let the ideas disappear.
I kind of did everything backwards. Boston Metaphysical is my first comic graphic novel project ever in my life. But prior to that, it lived in the form of a TV pilot that I wrote when at UCLA Film School. So the guts of it were already there. And then when I adapted it to a graphic novel, I went to sequential art class. I had a fabulous teacher and colleagues in there and mentors, which is what ended up doing well. But the one thing I could say is I'm a big fan of class work and going to classes and having an instructor who's been in the business and getting feedback from people around you to make your work better. And wherever, if you're just a writer or if you're an artist writer, I'm just a huge fan of that. I'm an academician anyway, so that I think really helps give you grounding, it gives you feedback, and also it helps you figure out what's the best organizational way. Like, this is all good, but you take bits and pieces from everybody and figure out what works for you.
Well, for me as an artist and a self-published writer, I take a sketchbook with me everywhere I go, including during my day job when I have downtime. So that's when I start writing down ideas as I go, and I do little thumbnails. Starting when I first wrote my self-published children's book, Hypercraft, I learned a lot of things along the way about layouts and page sizes and everything, like things that I have to learn all by myself, and then learning about test prep runs and other stuff. As for ideas, I do like there are other people's advice here. Just write it down, do it as you go, take your time on it, don't rush it, because I've learned that after having this book, I made my first self-published book for over 7 years. I started realizing, man, this feels like cringy old artwork. I need to update this. It doesn't reflect my work currently. So now I decided like hopefully this year I'm going to do a second reprint run of updated graphics and fonts in there.
I was just saying to Connie before the panel, comics like movies and records are never truly done, they're just a release. I would only add, there's two schools of thought. One is when you're first starting out and you want to do short comic stories, there are anthologies that have open calls. There's a great Facebook group called Let's Do All the Conventions and Take Over the World, which is all indie comics creators, and that's very useful for finding anthologies that have open calls, finding out how people did at conventions, if they actually made any money, finding who people are using for publishing, or making things, things like that.
Printing, printers.
Printers.
Oh yeah, that's key. Yeah, absolutely.
We talk to each other all the time.
Yeah, we do. But I would go, in my case, Alternative Comics publishes Tinseltown. They don't accept unsolicited submissions anymore, but they do have an ongoing anthology called Came Out on a Wednesday that publishes primarily science fiction, fantasy, and horror short comics. So you can always submit to them, and that's a great way to get the publisher's attention and keep your foot in the door. And one thing I would say about that is, if you're doing that, the shorter the better, because it's much more likely you might have a spot for a 2 to 6 page story than a 10 to 15 page story. But of course, I'm of the school that it's much easier to write a 23-page comic story than it is a 4-page story, because you have to have some kind of emotional impact. And when you're down to 4 pages, every panel, every word counts. But I guess that's why it's a good learning tool as well. You have a question?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for this panel. And I'm just really curious to hear anything any of y'all have about the relationship between writers and artists, working with artists, the creative part of it, and also even the business part of it, whether it's a hiring situation or a partnership, how that works in your worlds.
Yeah, go back down again. So I definitely advocate for finding a really good artist that you click with, because a good collaboration is essentially somebody who can creatively fill in the gaps that you miss as a writer. So, I'm just not artistically trained, so I don't, I write to the page, I think about things, but I don't know if something might not work. Or if maybe it's a little too wordy for the balloon, for the page or the panel, and then in turn the artist is like, "You're going to cover up all my work. You're not giving me any space here." So it's having a good balance where somebody can kind of see that and guide you accordingly, and then where they are very artistically inclined, and the things that are important, you would fill in those gaps. So it's a symbiotic. It's like Eddie and Venom, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. And in terms of a business-wise, just whatever venture that you were to take with an artist, it's a kind of team thing. So you also want to make sure that you have your guidelines set in advance. If it's a collaboration, set your guidelines. If it's paid for work, which I used to be so pro collaboration and work for free and do it and then split after, and it's always become so complicated for me. In the end, it's hindered and hobbled some of my work. So I'm now advocating for the other way around, is just paying people what they're owed for the work done, get it out there, and then collaborate when it comes time to market the book and share profit-wise that way. That's the best advice I can give. I don't know if everybody else agrees with me. Oh, and one more thing I want to say is that Connie actually is in a really great situation because she's a writer and an artist. That is so fantastic. I have to pay an artist. She can pay herself.
Yeah, it's called volunteer time, and she made the effort to do so.
So actually, it's a really great point, because when you're working as an individual like that, you are now a solo beacon, right? So when you have a team of people, a letterer, an art, a line art, colorist, they're all promoting as they're working on the project, which is then in turn boosting your project that you've hired them onto. So it's not just hiring them for their work, it's hiring them for their social media presence, it's hiring them for their output. So these are the kind of people you want to look for when you're seeking these images, not just to flip them through the portfolio, how do they operate? in the social media spaces, things like that, will they market you?
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to stress flexibility. A lot of times there's always that sort of duality of the person with the vision and the penciler or the artist. And giving an artist as much reference that you can think of as a writer, clipping things, saving files from the internet, any kind of photos, anything you even sketch even roughly, even writing a couple of blurbs down about a feeling of, let's say, a certain page or a certain vibe of an entire sort of scene is really integral, because there's been times, there's an infamous time I worked with a very, very wonderful artist named Michael Turner, and he was a Hallmark artist, but he was very, very busy. And when I say that I stress flexibility, is one time I had a page that was very moving, and it was a very large scene that was supposed to be on one page, where Sarah Panzini, confronts her boss, and they're going to have a really big emotional breakdown. And I've written full script where, there's about 6 panels, and, she comes in, and it's just a beautiful moment. And again, working with an indie studio, and oftentimes you don't have a lot of time, we were pushed to the limit time-wise, and when I got the pencils and needed to script to the page, that scene just became a single splash page of a head, of her head. It was, and of course there was no way to redo it, there was no time, but it was okay, now what do we do about this, and, you always want to say, oh, I need to have this redone, and oh, now there's no time to have it done, and again, a lot of times the penciler just has their own vision, and you just have to roll with this. So I would really stress, when you do find somebody that you hopefully jive with and really, really, sync with, if you end up getting something one day that you're just like, oh my God, I have no, we don't have time to change this, rein it in and just think of adapting somehow. And yeah, flexibility.
Yeah, and I would agree. I've seen the same thing, and you also want to make sure if you're working with an international artist that the references you give are understandable. Because I remember I wrote a whole big scene and I said, okay, he walks into a strip mall, he sees this, he sees that, and my artist is like, so it's a mall of strip clubs. I'm like, no, it's just this. So I went out and grabbed some photos. Okay, this is what a strip mall is. And you have to know that you might get those cultural differences. So when in doubt, throw pictures at them. I just say, okay, I'm going to go out, slap a bunch of pictures. So my scripts will have all the words and then a whole bunch of photo references for things that he may not understand, because in Brazil, they've never seen or heard of those. So I want to make sure that he understands those things. So be flexible with that, and always know that you can get some weird cultural differences. Just be prepared, and that's like she was saying, flexibility. Make sure you have it.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Edward and Christina said. The only thing I would add to that is contract. Everybody, there's a contract. There's no you're my friend, let's handshake. No. Don't ever do that. Could be your best friend, could be your wife, could be your mom, I don't care. Put them under contract.
Yeah.
And make sure you have a lawyer vet the contract, and it's very clear. Because a lot of relationships are broken up because of a lack of a contract. And think of it this way, sure, you're going to collaborate with a friend, but that collaboration and a legal contract, it's signed, you both know what it says, now you can go have fun.
Yeah. And, the way I do it in my contracts is that I pay the artist up front what I can afford to pay him, not necessarily as much as he's worth, but that is with the understanding that should our property be adapted into any kind of other media like television or film, that I will more or less be splitting that, because in the realm of comics, who's writing the story, this really becomes very quickly a gray area, because, you know, what the characters look like, what they're wearing, what the world looks like, that all, a lot of times, comes from the artists. So we have 2 minutes, maybe time for one more question. You right there.
I wanted to know real quick if you have any favorite marketing techniques for a story that's already out there that you want to continue, how to build a readership.
Have you done our crowdfunding yet?
It's crowdfunded. It's crowdfunded. We're kind of in the second year trying to build the audience further.
Cons?
Definitely Instagram, social media, if you can post, even if it's not even book related, I have found people really respond. That crazy Instagram algorithm really hops onto that. As long as, again, you keep your work-life balance, but fans really want to see what you're doing, even outside of comics, so post.
Thanks.
I was just gonna say, one tactic I've done is I collaborate with a hot sauce vendor. We actually developed the hot sauce. So it's Silk City hot sauce. The guy was featured on Hot One. He's a friend of mine, Jeff, out of Vermont. And we just put some of the artwork from Surrounded by Death in the label. We put a QR code where you can read issue 1 for free. So you try a little hot sauce, you can read the comic, you know, things like that. I think it's just completely out of the box. And then that's kind of, the best process there.
And with that, we are out of time, but I will say this, anybody that asks a question, stick around, we'll give you a bag of free comics and toys. And if you have any other questions, I think we can all hang out for a minute outside, and we'll be happy to answer them for you if you can read that comics as well.